Matthew 27. We're going to see what Scripture says about some of the things you just saw. I think visually it helps you to understand it so much more. Between the crucifixion and the resurrection was the burial. From his birth to his sacrifice on the cross, his burial, and his resurrection, you've got to understand, was all controlled by God. Before the foundation of the world, this plan was put into effect. And God was completely in charge. Let's look first of all at Joseph of Arimathea, because we don't really know a lot about him, and he's a key figure. Now, there's two key prophecies in the Bible that Joseph of Arimathea fulfills. I'm just going to read them to you. You don't have to turn. Isaiah 53:9. Now listen. He had done no wrong and had never deceived anyone, but he was buried like a criminal. He was put in a rich man's grave. There's two things right there. You need to understand that when people came off the cross, they threw him into a pit. It was a common grave for everyone, or they could have thrown him in Gehenna, which was the junk pile that burned night and day. That's what the criminal on the cross got. This says he was buried like a criminal. He could have been, but he was put in a rich man's grave. Here's another one. For as Jonah was in the belly of the great fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so will the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. Now, what you need to understand is it wasn't 3 24-hour days. In the Jewish culture, any part of a day counted at that day. So keep this in mind. From 9 to 3, he was on the cross on Friday. That's why we call it Good Friday. At 3 o'clock, he was pronounced dead. It was all on Friday. He was taken down off the cross, put in a grave before 6 o'clock. Now I'm going to explain why in just a second. He was put in a grave before 6 o'clock. And then he was in the grave all day Saturday. And then Sunday morning he rose. 3 days, a single part of each of the 3 days. Now, some people claim that he was crucified on Thursday because that would make it 3 full days in the grave. But if you did that, he'd have to be in the 4th day, Monday. So don't get caught up in that myth. The 3 days that he was in the grave wasn't a full 24-hour day. Now, this grave that he went to was not a common criminal's grave. It was a rich man. His name was Joseph of Arimathea. And it was hard for him to understand what these verses meant. It was hard for us to understand what this verse meant about buried like a criminal and in a rich man's grave until the actual burial, and then it comes clear. Let's look, if you would, in Matthew chapter 12:40. I'll just read it to you. Again, for as Jonah was in the belly of the great fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so will the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. These are the two prophecies that were fulfilled at Jesus' burial. Did anybody in the New Testament know, or anybody in the Old Testament know what this really meant? Did they? Probably not, because Jesus hadn't been born yet. But you need to understand, this is God's plan. He had it all worked out. Now, God really used Joseph of Arimathea And some of us don't know what there's much about him. But if you look in chapter 27 of Matthew, where I had you turn, if you look in 57, when the even was come, now even was after 3 o'clock, okay? There came a rich man of Arimathea named Joseph, who also himself was Jesus' disciple. Now, Joseph of Arimathea was a member of the Sanhedrin. He was a big shot. And who actually put Jesus to death? Who was it? The Jews, the Sanhedrin. He was part of that, but he did not consent to the crucifixion of Jesus. He was what we called an undercover follower. He was a disciple of Jesus. He was being taught by Jesus. And he would sneak in just like Nicodemus did and hear the teaching of the Lord Jesus Christ. But he couldn't let anybody know. Why? They'd throw him out. He loses wealth. He loses power. He loses authority. Did this take courage? Did this take courage for him to do this? Think about it. It did. Now, if you look in, as I said, Jesus is dead by 3 o'clock. And Pilate was really, really surprised that Jesus was dead already. Because usually people hung on the cross for sometimes 3 days, not 6 hours. So if you look in verse 58, Joseph of Arimathea went to Pilate and begged the body of Jesus. What's the word begged mean? Pleaded. Then Pilate commanded the body to be delivered. And when Joseph had taken the body, he wrapped it in a clean linen cloth. Jesus had been on the cross from 9 until 3. He died at 3 o'clock. Now, no one took his life. I told you this last week. He gave up his life. He has the power to do that. We don't, but he does. He gave up himself. And this astounded Pilate that he could be dead this soon. Now, he had to be buried by Friday to fulfill the 3 days, right? 6 o'clock on Friday night started the Sabbath. It was Passover. This was a high Sabbath. And it's listed in the Old Testament in Deuteronomy. I'll read it to you. If someone has committed a crime worthy of death, is executed and hung on a tree, the body must not remain hanging from the tree overnight. You must bury the body in the same day, for anyone who is hung is cursed in the sight of God in this way. You will prevent the defilement of the land that your God has given you as your special possession. He had to be taken off the cross by 6 o'clock. You see, the Jewish people weren't allowed to do anything on the Sabbath. So the day before the Friday was called the preparation for the Sabbath. They couldn't cook, they couldn't clean, they couldn't go to the gas station. They weren't allowed to do anything on the day before the Sabbath, and especially this Sabbath because it was Passover. So basically, there's a problem. Somebody had to take Jesus' body off the cross and get it in a grave by 6 o'clock. Now, they didn't have undertakers and hearses. I used to help an undertaker carry bodies. That was one of my many jobs. And they're heavy. They're heavy. And we used to go and pick it up at the airport and different places like that. But the day of preparation, they only had 3 hours. They only had 3 hours because it was Passover. Now, so Joseph of Arimathea went to Pilate and begged him for the body. It wasn't an easy step, and it was a courageous step, because now Pilate knows what? That this member of the Sanhedrin is what? A follower of Jesus. It took great courage. Then, in order for them to be sure before they took Jesus off the cross, they realized the other two criminals weren't dead because they were lingering on. So what they did is they had to get them off the cross, all three of them off the cross before the Sabbath. So they took a wooden mallet and they went out and they broke their legs, the two criminals. This way they couldn't push themselves up to breathe, and they would suffocate in 5 minutes. They went to Jesus, and they found out he was already dead. Now, these were Roman soldiers. Had they ever seen somebody dead before? Many times. That was their job. They were killers. So when they got to Jesus, they knew he was dead. But they did something that they did to all the criminals. They did what they called the death stroke. The death stroke was a spear that was placed in the side of the criminal hanging on the cross. Now, why did they have to do that to Jesus if they knew he was already dead? Any ideas? Pardon me? That's right. There was a prophecy in the Zechariah that we would look upon the one that was speared. And that fulfills that prophecy. Now, did the Roman soldiers know about this prophecy? Do you think they were up on Zechariah? No. It wasn't known to them, but it had to be fulfilled. He had to be taken off the cross, couldn't get off the cross till all of them were dead. And then it was either to the pit or to Gehenna, buried in these places. Now, what did Joseph of Arimathea do? And when Joseph had taken the body, he wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, laid it in his own new tomb, which he had hewn out of the rock, and he rolled a great stone to the door and sepulchre and departed. Did he have a lot of help carrying Jesus' body? You think? Where was the disciples? Did they help? No. Could the women that were at the cross help him? No. What do you think he might have done? If you hated Jesus, would you take him down off the cross? And most of them did. The only other opportunity that he had was there was a man named Nicodemus, who in John chapter 3 came to Jesus by night. He was in the same boat with Joseph of Arimathea. The only thing I can think of, maybe Nicodemus might have helped him. Now, how close do you think the tomb that he had? Now, this was his tomb. He had hewn it out of the rock, so when someday he died, this is where he'd go. How far do you think he had to carry Jesus? Any ideas? 2 miles? It's said that the tomb was in a garden. And the garden was not that far from Golgotha, the cross. It's thought that he probably only carried him maybe 2 miles, maybe 1 mile, maybe just a matter of feet. He couldn't have carried him much more than that. Okay? Now, if you look in verse 62, on the next day that followed the day of the preparation, the chief priests and Pharisees came together unto Pilate, saying, Sir, remember that deceiver said, while he was yet alive, after 3 days I will rise again. There it is again, 3 days. Jesus said it. Does Jesus lie? No. Command, therefore, that the sepulchre be made sure until the third day, lest the disciples come by night, steal him away, and say unto the people, He is risen from the dead. So the last hour shall be worse than the first. Now, there's quite a few theories about the resurrection of Jesus. There was a book written called The Passover Plot. Anybody ever hear of it? All right. Now, in that book, they have some theories. Number one, the disciples took Jesus' body. He didn't really rise from the dead. If the disciples took Jesus' body and he was dead, would they show it to somebody? How could they prove that, what they did? That doesn't make sense. How about the swoon theory? Anybody ever hear of that? That says that Jesus really didn't die on the cross. He just went unconscious. And when he got into the cool tomb and all the different chemicals they put on him to anoint him, he woke up. How's that sound? Is that the truth? No. There's more theories than that, but there are only two I'm going to go into. All right. Now let's look at verse, if you would, 65. Pilate said unto them, You have a watch. Go on your way. Make it as sure as you can. So they went and made the sepulchre sure, sealing the stone and setting a watch. Why'd they put a stone in front of the grave? Anybody know? You ever thought about it? Pardon me? Thieves. They had grave robbers. How about wild animals? Could they have gotten in? How about disciples? Could they have gotten in? Yeah. There's lots of reasons why the stone was there. Now, if you would, let's go on. Now, there was a group of people there at the tomb. Mary Magdalene, the other Mary, and that was pretty much it, besides Joseph of Arimathea. Look at 28, verse 1. The end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week. Now, what day is that? Sunday. Do you know why we go to church on Sunday? Because that's the day that Jesus rose from the dead, and it's the first day of the week. People think Monday's the first day of the week. It's not. Sunday is. Toward the first day of the week came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre. Behold, there was a great earthquake, for the angel of the Lord descended from heaven, came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat upon it. His countenance, His countenance was like lightning, his raiment white as snow. And for fear of him, the keepers did shake and become as dead men. What happened to the soldiers? Huh? Yep, they went as dead men. Verse 5, and the angel answered and said unto the women, Fear not, for I know that ye seek Jesus, which is crucified. He is not here. He is risen, as he said. Come and see the place where the Lord lay. Quickly go tell the disciples that he is risen from the dead. Behold, he goeth forth for you into Galilee. There shall ye see him. Lo, I have told you. Did the disciples believe Mary when she told them? No. Who was the worst of the bunch? Thomas, doubting Thomas. And the other reason that Jesus had the death spear, because what did he say to Thomas? Come and thrust your hand in my side, and you'll believe. And you'll believe. You see how everything fits together? the whole picture, the whole plot was all from God. And Jesus rose from the dead. And if he had not risen from the dead, we have no hope of heaven. Because we're going to rise from the dead someday too and be with him forever and ever and ever. It's so important. I believe with all my heart, if you don't believe in the resurrection of the dead, you cannot be saved. You cannot be saved. You got to believe in the death, burial, and resurrection of the Lord. It's real. It's real. I hope it's real in your life. And it's not just Resurrection Sunday that you think about it, because it should be in your thoughts every single day. Just like heaven should be in your thoughts every single day. If it's not, you need to do some homework. You need to get things right in your own life. We're so caught up in all the nonsense about trans and all this nonsense. We don't think about heaven as much as we should, or the resurrection. Don't get caught in that dump. Don't get caught in that slump. Be thankful every single day of your life that Jesus rose from the dead. And that's why I don't call it Easter, because Easter has no relationship to the resurrection. I call it Resurrection Day. Easter has to do with Easter bunnies, Easter eggs, all the nonsense of the world. It has nothing to do with Jesus Christ. You might say, well, you're an old phony or an old fool. It's just what I think. And I'm allowed to think as long as I'm living in America today. I can say what I think. Next Sunday, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to preach on the transgender movement and how it compares with the Bible. So if you have somebody that you'd like to invite, please do, because they might take me out in handcuffs. I don't know. But that's what I'm going to do, because it's the biggest threat to America today. And we're the last bastion of hope, the church. If we don't preach the truth, you're never going to hear it. Never going to hear it. We're going to have communion. And the reason I wanted to have communion today was because it's Resurrection Day.